From the mysteries of the universe to the mysteries of the unknown, this is Mysterious Realms with Mr. Cyber. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Here is your host, Mr. Cyber.
Hey everyone, welcome to Mysterious Realms. It's great to have you all here today. We have an awesome show today. We have Rosemary Thornton with us. She has a fascinating story. So, little backstory. When Rose's husband committed suicide at their home, she fell into a pit so deep and dark that medical professionals expressed doubts that she'd ever recover. 2 years later, Rose was diagnosed with stage 2 cancer, and during a related minor medical procedure, she bled to death and had no heartbeat for more than 10 minutes. In heaven, her predominant emotion was profound gratitude that this life experience had ended. But the angelic being she encountered encouraged Rose to return to Earth. She was told that if she agreed to go back, she'd be restored to perfect health, physical, emotionally, and mentally. And Rosemary's story is very fascinating. We're going to have all of her information in the description below, but it is a privilege and an honor to have with us today Rosemary Thornton. Well, hello, Rosemary. How are you?
I'm well. How about you?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for joining us today. It's a privilege to speak with you. And I was reading your story, and it's actually pretty sad how it starts out. Because I was reading everything, and the first point I want to ask you, Rosemary, if I can start with, and I always ask all of my guests this. Growing up, did you ever believe in, let's say, near-death experiences or an afterlife, per se?
Very much so. In fact, that is part of my story. I'd always had an utter fascination with the whole topic. And gosh, I think it started in 76 or 77 when Raymond Moody published Life After Life. I must have read that book. I read it so many times I wore it out. And then the story of Dannion Brinkley, which is featured in that. I found that whole topic just utterly compelling. I read every book I could get my hands on. It's funny, people today said, "Oh, have you read this book? Have you read that book?" And I'm, yep. You're not going to name the book on an NDE that I have not read.
Yeah.
So yes, and my father was, how can I say this nicely? He was kind of an unpleasant fellow, but he figured out early on that I had, I guess we called it ESP back then, and had a sensitivity to things. And so he kind of developed it as a parlor trick. And when my mother caught wind of that, she put a stop to it. But like one thing my dad said is, people like you don't need words. We will talk telepathically. And as you develop that skill, you'll become more adept at it. And then he would do stuff like ask me one of the things he'd ask me where my mother was. I mean, I was like 5 or 6. And I would tell him. And then one day I said, "She's coming home. She just turned the corner into our neighborhood." And he said, 30 seconds later, she rolled in the driveway. So I was that kid.
Wow. So I'd like to ask you, going back to kind of how this all started, where did the pieces start to begin to come together? I know from reading your whole bio, it all started with your husband's suicide. Is that correct?
Yeah, I guess, really, where does the story of a life start? But yeah, that's probably as good a starting place as any. Before I was married for 24 years to my first husband, who was the father of my 3 daughters. And just as that marriage ended, I was finishing up my first book on the Sears homes, which is really the topic for which I was best known. So that book brought me so many beautiful opportunities. I met so many wonderful people. I got to travel all over the country as, the author. That book and the ancillary benefits did so much to lift me up out of, some difficult times.
Yeah.
And it was probably because of that I met and married my litigator husband. I had kind of had enough self-esteem and enough street cred, I guess, and everything else to be appropriately linked with a successful attorney. So that I thought that was the man that I spent my life waiting for. I mean, my wedding vows, we were married 10 years, and my wedding vows, I publicly proclaimed that he was the answer to a lifetime of prayers.
Yeah.
Because while I say I was married 24 years the first time, it's true, but I tried so hard I literally would beg God to please heal this marriage. And I did everything I knew to do to keep that marriage from failing. And I really felt like my second husband was the culmination of those 24 years of prayer. So to have it end as it did was pretty eviscerating.
Well, I can tell you, I've never been through anything like that, so I really can't say anything, but all I can imagine is that's just awful. Completely awful.
Yeah, and it didn't help that, I mean, a lot of things didn't help, but his last words were a 4-word text message blaming me for his suicide. And there's no do-overs on that.
Correct.
And after he sent that text, he pulled the trigger, and he did this at our home. So it was I think I had what we would call a psychotic break. I lost my mind. And the thing is, at first, you're in shock, and then you start drifting away. And I could feel myself drifting away. And this continued for some time. I mean, a family friend that actually there were a couple psychiatrists and psychologists involved. And one of them said, you need to find long-term care for her. She's not coming back from this. It'd be hard for anybody to come back from this, but she's so sensitive, that this is it. And I was almost comforted by that, because I thought, yeah, I'm not. And in fact, kind of funny, not really, about, I don't know, 3 or 4 months out, I sat down with a financial advisor who wanted to, help me figure out my financial future. And she was perky and so naive. And she said, "Where do you see yourself in 2 years?" And I said, "Oh, I'll be dead." And she said, "That's not helpful." And I said, "A human being cannot survive this level of trauma. I will be dead in 2 years." I said, "So financial planning, I'm not too worried about it. I just need enough money to last 2 years." And it was, that's where I was. And for a time, I couldn't get comfortable. I didn't go back to the house, obviously. I couldn't get comfortable in anybody's home. So I began sleeping in my car at night. And, it was a nice car. It was a Camry, had heated seats and a nice sound system. But that's a pretty far tumble from living in a beautiful home in a beautiful place with your handsome attorney husband to sleeping in your Camry because you can't get comfortable anywhere. And then a friend on the periphery of my life, she was a realtor. She said, "You're not sleeping in that car anymore. We're not doing this." And I said, I can't sleep. I can't get comfortable anywhere else. And she said, "You're coming home with me." And I said, No, I'm not." "Nice try, and thanks for playing, but no, I'm not." And she said, "Well, I tell you what, try it one night." And that was brilliant. That was absolutely 100% completely brilliant, because I was willing to try anything for one night. And I went home with her, and she did this thing where she'd stand at the foot of my bed and say a prayer as I, laid there in the dark trying to sleep. And she lived out in the country, and so you could hear the whippoorwills at night, and you could hear the train whistle at the crossing about, I guess, a quarter mile away, all of which seemed like very soothing sounds. So the next night she said, "Come back tonight," and come back tonight. I did that for 4 months. And at this time I had lost so much weight. I looked cadaverous. I just couldn't swallow food. And she started making dinner every night, and she would make sure that I ate at least one meal a day.
Yeah.
And that I didn't gain weight, but I stopped losing weight. And that was actually a huge deal. And so then another friend stepped in, and he said he would take care of me and live in my house, that we could rent a little house together, and he would live in the house and help me take care of me and the dog until I was functional again. And we all knew that could be forever.
Yeah.
We all knew that might just be how this plays out. So he did that, and it was very, very gracious and generous. And he would also make me dinner every night. The goal was to get Rosemary to eat one meal a day. That's all anybody could do. And the only reason I'm sharing this is because I shared this story with a friend out here in the St. Louis area, And I kind of gave her the highlights, and she said, well, of course you were sad. Your husband had just died. This wasn't a matter of being sad that my husband had died. This was a woman that I've always thought of myself as a smart cookie. I mean, I've written 9 books on architectural history. I have spent years of my life. I spent 6 years researching one book. I spent 4 years researching the houses that Sears built. So I thought I was pretty successful and smart and all the good things.
Correct.
And I became addicted to benzodiazepines. I started abusing alcohol. I found if you had some whiskey in the morning and had, way too many Valium as a chaser, you felt pretty good for a couple hours. And you should never mix alcohol and benzos. It's potentially fatal. But it was the only way I could survive for a few hours at a time.
Well, if I can...
So I was a hot mess.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Rosemary.
No, I just say that's the point of me sharing these stories, is that this wasn't just a woman having a nervous breakdown. This was somebody losing her mind an inch at a time. And I kept telling myself every day, you're going to get better. It's going to get better. I put Bible verses and affirmations on paper all over my house, literally papered the walls with bring into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. The devil comes but to steal, kill, and destroy. I came that you might have life and have it more abundantly. I covered my house in affirmations and Bible verses. So if I had a freak out, no matter where I was, I could stop, stare at a wall, and remember, okay, I can bring into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. Fear not, for I am with thee. And I memorized a lot of the Psalms, and on it went. And P.S., my buddy Milton, and this matters, my buddy Milton was the one who lived with me for a couple of years and took care of me. And the beauty part of that is I didn't even have the capability of taking care of my little dog. I had a Sheltie.
Yeah.
So he enabled me to be reunited with the dog. So the dog and Milton and I lived in this little house, and we each had a bedroom and a bath, which was perfect, and it had a den and a living room. So it was really a great house for us. And he just made sure I stayed something close to sane. Like, he made sure my favorite foods were in the house. He made sure that, like, if somebody came to the door, that they wouldn't talk to me unless they were safe, because there's a lot of people say a lot of stupid things to a suicide widow. I've been asked twice by so-called friends, did your husband kill himself because he thought you were having an affair?
Oh my gosh.
One, if I was, it's not my fault, and 2, I wasn't, and 3, how do you answer a question like that? It's like, have you stopped beating your wife?
Well, that's exactly right.
There is no answer.
Well, if I can just chime in really quick, I can relate a lot, and I'll admit to you. So I have PTSD from serving in the military. I know exactly what you're talking about, and for our audience who don't understand, it's very real. I've been on the benzos.
They're fabulous, aren't they?
Oh gosh, I got a volume. I'm looking at my desk in front of me. I got some Valium. I got a bottle of Ambien just in case. But one thing I know the difference, and I'm safe. You don't mix, and you wait a certain time until you can take a different one. But yeah, I mean, it's completely real, Rosemary, and it's hard to explain to people that, when your mind is like that, you know what's going on in the moment, okay? You just can't do anything about it. That's what sucks. It's a prison in your head.
It is, and PTSD is so severe. To give you one example, I was sitting in a coffee shop. It was one of the rare times I ventured out into the world. I was sitting in a little coffee shop. Somebody opened I always sat by the door. We all do. Those of us who have PTSD always find the exit, make sure our back is to the wall and we're facing the world,
Oh gosh.
So that's where I was sitting.
I'm so vigilant. Well, when I go into a restaurant with my wife, I got to sit at a certain side of the table so I'm facing the entrance and everything.
People don't get it.
They don't get it. They think you're crazy. In actuality, you're not crazy. People might think you are, but you're not. You know exactly what you're doing. You're just extra precautious, a little too precautious sometimes, but we know exactly what we're doing.
Yes. Well, and so the wind caught this exit door, one of these heavy big doors, and slammed it shut. And I jumped up and I screamed at nobody in particular, what the F is wrong with you? And I mean, it was pretty loud. And I was so horrified by what I'd done. I just abandoned my food and my little donut and hot chocolate and ran out the door. But that's the problem. You can't say, oh, I like to think of myself as very disciplined. Nobody can spend 6 years writing one book unless they have a degree of mental discipline. But it's like all that went away. And one of the side effects of this, and I wish if I was queen of the world, I just would grab, I don't know, politicians by the lapels and say, help us fix this. I victim. I have been reading books since I was 4 years old. I learned to read at age 4, and I lost the ability to read. And it's like I could read words and, like shoe and black and white and boot, but it was just like somebody put them in a bucket and threw them against the wall. I didn't know what they meant. I
Yeah.
didn't know what they were all trying to say. I couldn't comprehend. And I know one night, about a year and a half into this, or maybe a year, I decided in rare form to make a cake box mix. And I read the directions, and it was like oil and eggs and water and the cake, and then do this and do that. I literally tossed it at my friend Milton, and I said, I can't figure out what the F this is trying to tell me. And I had been standing there staring at this box for who knows how long, but I couldn't put it together. And that's what PTSD does to your head. That's what trauma does to somebody who's a lifelong reader. And I have talked to several of my women friends. I'm in a Facebook group of suicide survivors, which is how we're known.
Yeah.
And this is common. This is not uncommon, because we're not intended to see the stuff that involve guns and flesh. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Totally understand.
Yeah.
Totally
Yeah.
understand. So you
Especially when it's your loved one.
Oh gosh, it's so true. And if people, you never. It's kind of a catch-22, because you wish people understood, but at the same time you hope they don't understand, because that would mean that they were in that kind of situation as well. So it's kind of a catch.
It is, but then I understand why people in trauma become hermits. I
Yeah.
really get it, because you can't subject yourself. I remember I went out to a poker party at a friend's house, and I thought, all right, it's going to be good food. It's going to be people having a good time. Well, the music was so loud and the crowd was so loud that I said to my hostess, I said, I so appreciate your inviting me, but this is a little much for me. I'm going to go home. And she later said to a friend, she said, I had no idea Rosemary was that fragile. And frankly, it totally ticked me off, because I thought, how dare you? This took everything I have to come out, leave my comfort zone, to come out and be part of a group. And just because the noise is too loud and the people are too loud and I'm uncomfortable, that she describes me as fragile. And I thought, I did think, like you just said, I thought, you have no idea what it means to come home and find your husband's, messed up.
Yeah.
People have no clue. And I wish people could just have a little more compassion. So this went on, and I felt like I was trying my best, and yet one thing I struggled with is suicidal ideation. I had a plan, and boy, was it a detailed plan. When I got really depressed, I would fantasize about buying everything I needed for the plan. I thought in great detail about how I would do it, where I would do it, when I would do it, and it comforted me. It just was comforting. It was like, okay, this is how we're going to end it. And I'm going to get through 24 hours, and then this will be over, and I'll give myself permission to do this. And so I was in a pretty bad way. In fact, I was moving something in a garden. It was a big, heavy bag of rocks from one part of the yard to the other. And I felt something go wrong internally, and I went into the house and into the bathroom, and I was bleeding a little bit from, lady parts. So I made it, and this is 29 months out now for my husband's suicide. I went to the doctor, and they said, well, you've got cervical cancer. And they sent me to an oncologist, and he said, yeah, it's stage 2. It's already, growing into the flesh in nearby areas. And he said, in fact, it's advanced enough that your flesh is distorted from from what's going on.
Wow.
So that's when he did this biopsy, a hospital biopsy, where they put you in the hospital and they give you general anesthetic, and I had never been anesthetized. I had never been unconscious, through chemicals. So this was a big deal. I was terrified.
Oh, it's weird,
and I
isn't it?
couldn't believe it.
It's.
Oh my God.
I wish I could fall asleep that fast.
Yes, I understand how Michael got addicted to propofol.
Yeah.
So I couldn't believe that at 29 months, I'm struggling so hard. I had been praying 3 prayers every night. One was, God, heal me or let me die. And 2 was, I can't handle any more hard decisions, because my husband, being a lawyer, had left behind some pretty ugly messes for me to deal with, and every decision had massive consequences. And 3 was, I beg God, when I die, no life review. I had recurring nightmares of finding my husband, or I had a nightmare that I found him just as he put the gun in his mouth. And I, ran to tackle him and stop him. So I beg God, I've been through this once. I don't want to see this again. So those are my 3 prayers. So then when I was diagnosed with this, I thought, God, I was pretty clear. I said, heal me or let me die. I didn't say give me cancer and make it go on for years. Just let me go. So I wake up from this surgical thing, and it's supposed to be pretty simple, and they're just taking flesh from here and there to figure out exactly how far this has gone and blah, blah, blah. And I wake up from this, and I tell the RN, I say, hey, I'm bleeding an awful lot. And she said, oh, honey, once you get home and lie down, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
So I toddled off to the bathroom a couple more times, still in the recovery room there. And fortunately, I had my buddy Milton as a witness, and I said, no, I'm bleeding an awful lot. And she's, again, just was very dismissive. So they sent me home like that. So by the time I got home, I had trashed my friend's car. I mean, I had pads and pads and pads and pads and pads in the chair, pads on the car seat, pads everywhere. I still bled through everything. So I get home, and my friend Milton is with me at my home now. And his sister Mabel had come out to help with all this because I was pretty terrified. And I went in my bedroom. And in the bedroom, I realized I was still losing a tremendous amount of blood. So I went into my bathroom, and I stood in my big, pretty white walk-in shower because, I had white carpet. And when you're bleeding to death, you don't want to mess up the carpet. And I stood in that shower, and I saw how much blood was coming out. And I said, maybe this is God's mercy. You've been asking every night for God to let you go. Yeah. This is your doorway. This is the path out. Because one of my prayers, I think it's from Corinthians. I think it's Eugene Peterson's The Message. God will show you the way out.
Yes, He will.
Prayed that. Yep, I prayed that every day for 29 months, and I thought this is the way out.
You were like, Amen.
Yeah. I really was. I was like, this is it. Because, bleeding to death, I knew this from reading NDE accounts. It's not a bad way to go. You get tired, you get sleepy, the end.
Well, you know what? I always wondered what that was like. I'm not interested, but I always wondered what that was like. I figured it felt like, okay, you just get worn out, you start to get tired, you lose energy, and then bam, it's like a soothing way. At least that's how I picture it.
I don't think it's a bad. I mean, I have died from bleeding to death, so I guess I'm as good an expert.
You are an expert now, Rosemary.
So I stood in that shower, and I really did think this is God showing me the way out. And so I was standing in the shower, and I thought, all right, just sit down, and it'll be over. Because I knew once I was already getting pretty wobbly.
Yeah.
I knew once I sat down, there was no getting back up. So I stood up, and I was still standing. I did not sit. And I thought, Mabel has just driven from Ohio to St. Louis to be with me. Milton has taken care of me for 2 years plus. Is it really fair to them that they come in here in 10 minutes and find me splayed on the floor, covered in blood? Is that really fair to them? And I thought, dag, it's not. So I pushed off the shower door. I pushed off the wall there and exited the shower and walked out to wrapped a towel around me and walked out to the living room and said, call an ambulance, I'm dying. So they did. They took me to a crappy, I didn't say that out loud. They took me to a little ER.
Oh, that's okay. You can say, don't worry about it, Rosemary. Trust me, you ain't heard me talk. You're good.
It was a little ER in Virginia there in southeastern Virginia, and it was not attached to a hospital. Mm-hmm. It was a standalone ER, which was a boo-boo. And the thing is, when the ambulance took me, there was no lights, there was no siren, they were stopping for the stoplights. I'm like, guys, come on.
Wow.
I've made this decision. Let's get this show on the road. So they took me in, and I had a doctor that was so young. I swear, I think she had play school on her stethoscope. Very young doctor. And when she examined me, again, not a great bedside manner, she said, there's so much blood, I can't see anything. So meanwhile, I had an RN to my left, because I'm on the gurney now, and I'm in this little ER cubicle. And I grabbed the RN's hand. She was about my age, late 50s, and very, very motherly, very, very gentle, and yet it seemed very clear-minded. So I grabbed her hand and said, promise me you're not going to let me die. And she said, oh, honey, we have many solutions for this. We're not going to let you die. And I was comforted by that. So then, and this was a terrible mistake, they packed me with gauze. In other words, they didn't stop the bleeding. They just stopped it from being messy.
Oh, my God. So they didn't try to take any measures to stop it?
That turned out to be a boo-boo.
Oh my. Well, you know what? It was a boo-boo, but it took you on a journey, didn't it?
It did indeed. So then they gave me Dilaudid for the pain, which is a morphine derivative, which by the way is contraindicated for plunging blood pressure.
Wow.
So because and the thing about that Dilaudid is morphine's powerful,
Yeah.
and now they're giving it to somebody who's probably down who knows how much blood, which means the concentration of the drug is that much greater. So it wasn't long after this. They exited. They left. I was hooked up to a blood pressure machine and a pulse ox, and they walked out of that cubicle and left me alone with my buddy Milton. So my buddy Milton's thinking, well, they've just left. But he said my blood pressure kept going down. And he said at one point he looked up at the blood pressure monitor because it's cycling on and off, who knows, every 2 minutes, 3 minutes, I don't know. At one point he looked up at it and it was 32 over 25.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
And he said he was standing up to go get the doctor. And that's when he said my eyes popped open. And he said, I tried to sit up on the gurney. I reached up to heaven. He said, you talked to somebody only you could see. And then after very few words, you flopped back down. And he said, what he said, you reached your arms up and wiggled your fingers, almost like a child reaching up for a parent. And then he said, you flopped back down on the gurney, and then your blood pressure went to error, which meant it was lower than 32 over 25. And that's when they all returned. Meanwhile, I was having the time of my life. I think that reaching up for heaven, I think that's when my soul left my body, because I was in a unconscious, dreamless state at the moment of my death, and I woke up when I died. I woke up being catapulted out of my body.
See, that's
and
crazy.
Isn't that cool?
Awesome. Yeah, you know what? And everybody says that. It's just so amazing.
Yeah, because I was in nowhere land when they gave me that. Between the blood loss and the Dilaudid, I was in just I don't know how to describe it, a deep dreamless state. And I woke up, and the thing that was so cool, it was like there was a silver sinewy strand from the crown of my head to the heel of my feet. And it's like somebody pulled back on it with an archer's bow and let loose. And that pop or that ping or that slap against my back is what felt my soul just catapulting out of my body. Very dramatic. And I even heard this pop noise when I made the separation.
Yeah.
So I'm hurtling away in this blackness, this perfect, velvety, comforting. And the thing is, it was comfort and peace as a verb. This blackness was actively comforting me. It was like infusing me with peace and calm and tranquility and joy.
So it wasn't a black, it was a living blackness in a way. It was alive.
Yes. I've heard somebody, yes, that's a great way to say it. It was alive, palpable even. And I've heard somebody describe it as black velvet. And that is how it was, just like softer than soft than soft. So the first words out of my mouth were, I'm dying. And then, being the longtime writer editor, I said, actually, you're not dying, you're dead. And it cracked me up that here I am going to my reward and I'm correcting my tense.
Yeah.
And I laughed out loud. And I thought, I sound just like I sounded in life. I still have my funny little giggle. And it was like somebody took my intellect and supercharged. It's like from going from 60 amp service to 100,000 amps. And everything was so much clearer. And it was like being on earth was the dream. And all that pain and misery and suffering I had known, it was almost like a parent, a loving father had shaken me awake and saying, it's over, wake up. It was just a dream.
Well, you know what?
Wake
if
up,
I can
Rosemary.
say, Rosemary, I've heard a lot of people say that because I've had a vivid dream. You've had a vivid dream. But when we wake up, we know it was a dream, but even though it was so vivid. When you passed on, did our life right here in the now feel like the vivid dream versus being there?
Yes, this whole
wow.
earthly thing felt like a dream, and it felt like an unimportant dream.
Oh,
That's
that's
kind of
wild.
what got me, isn't it though? Because everything seems so big, everything seems so big and important, and I don't know. But yes, it really felt just like a dream, and I was, as you said in your intro, I was profoundly grateful that it was over. But what I was going to say about the giggle, I was just thrilled that everything I am had made the transition. You know, we all wonder about death, and I had read literally a lifetime of these NDE books, and I had always wondered, you know, what's it really like though? But the fact that my giggle went with me, and then I thought, I don't have breath sounds. I don't know. I don't think I have vocal cords. I know that I don't. I mean, I don't have ears, but I'm still making the same. I'm still giggling. I'm still making the same exact noises I did. I still sound like I do, and I still have my weird sense of humor that I think that I should correct my tense while I'm dying.
That is
dead.
awesome.
Isn't that amazing? And so this went on, and I just was so happy. I mean, it had been, frankly, harder than hell 59 years. And I did have some joy with my second husband, and I had joy with my children, of course.
Yeah.
But the last 29 months had just been hell. Just pure hell on earth. I mean, my husband and I had these big yard parties and had all kinds of fancy food. And we had, you know, his fancy friends over, and we got, you know, they would bring us these beautiful gifts, and it was all very upscale. It was all very high rent, you know? And after his death, without, oh, I don't think there's an exception. Without exception, all those people who used to come to our house, his people disappeared. You know, they all went away. I lost my whole life. I didn't just lose my husband, my house, and my sanity. I lost all these people. And what's interesting is more people came back into my life, the real people, the people, you know, who don't make $250,000 a year. The real people came back into my life, and like Tracy, the realtor, you know, she lived out in a modest house in a beautiful farm out in, you know, western part of Virginia, or well, western of Metro East.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of people came back in, and boy, they were real people. They were people who literally just helped pull me out of the ditch. So as I'm floating away, I just feel so grateful and so happy that everything I am went with me, down to my giggle and my funny sense of humor. So I'm floating further away in this blackness, and I'm like, oh, this is just getting better and better. I don't even know what comes next, but I know it's going to be great. And also, I mean, I am the queen of rumination. I always wondered how I would die. You know, what's going to take me out? And I was like, wow, it was a medical mistake. Isn't that funny? Because I was born and raised a Christian Scientist, and it's a medical mistake that takes me out.
Go figure.
Right. I thought this is
my
great.
Goodness.
God has a sense of humor.
He sure does.
Then,
he's like, watch this, Rosemary.
I know. Yeah, hold my earth. So then, as I'm floating away, I feel the presence of this massive spiritual being to my left, slightly behind me, and much taller than me. So I'm like, wow, I'm not even alone. I have somebody with me. And I turn my head to the left to see who this is. And I'm thinking, I guess I have a head because I've just turned it to the left. And it's like I was taking in information from 120 senses, you know, forget 7 or 6, whatever, 5, whatever we have.
Yeah.
I was taking it in from everywhere. So I turned my head to the left, and I said, literally with a lilt in my voice, and I said, and who are you? And the answer was immediate. The answer was, and this was life-changing. I've shared this with people, and sometimes they just cry, but that's what it meant to me. They said, the answer was, the answer came with words. Yes, it came with words, but it also came with this infusion of understanding. The answer was, you, Rosemary, you are the image and likeness. I'm the original. And I was like, wow. That's Genesis 1:27.
Yeah,
made the image and likeness of God.
Yeah, that's deep. Wow.
It is deep.
Wow.
And I was like, my whole life I've wondered, what does it mean to be made in the image and likeness of God? It means there's an original. So I thought, this is so cool. In fact, when I came back from this, I told everybody about this, and I called her Big Rosemary. That didn't go over well with some folks. But I didn't know how else to describe this massive spiritual being that is the original of me. So, and the thing is that one of the things I came back with from this, my father, he was an executive, had a big office, big desk, and I would go visit him at his office, and there were pictures of my 3 brothers on his desk, 3 8x10s of my 3 brothers. And I said, Dad, why isn't there a picture of me? And he said, well, when you do something worthwhile, you'll earn a spot on my desk. And then when I was 14, he abandoned the family, just took off. It was awful. It was just awful. So anyway,
now, can I ask you really quick, Rosemary, if you don't mind?
Sure.
And this is just, I don't mean to interrupt you here. When you turned your head, the question I have is vision. Is your vision just like here where you look around, or is it more in depth, or, you know what I'm getting at? Do you
Yes. Well,
see
that's
more?
part of what got me is that in this blackness I could not see. It was just this perfect blackness. And one of my thoughts was, ever since my husband's suicide, I've been terrified of the dark, literally terrified of it. And I thought, I'm terrified of the dark, and yet I'm the happiest I've ever been.
Yeah.
And after I came back from this, I prefer to sleep in a pitch black room because it reminds me of that event. So that's one of the many little side effects of that. So my point about my dad was I cringed when people talked about God as father. I just cringed. I just thought, oh, he's like father. Ugh.
Yeah. Why? I don't
So
want to be like. I don't want God to be like him.
yeah, so it introduced me to a God that people laugh about this too, but that God delighted in me. God was crazy about me, or God really, really, really liked me.
Hmm.
And I got it, that not that God was saying, oh, look at Rosemary, she's screwed up again. It was God really, really, really enjoyed us and delighted in us and was happy with us. Even when we're drinking whiskey and popping the Valium, God is still like, yep, yeah, we're going to get through this. So this thing that you're the image and likeness, I'm the original, it was massive. And I remember thinking that would have been real good to know back there on Earth, but still good information to have. What's next? And one of the things is, as soon as I came back from this, I mean, I was in the hospital for several days after this, but as soon as I got home, I mean, I've been a newspaper reporter for, well, it was 3 years I worked in that job, but I wanted to document everything. So I wrote this all down. It was like 30 some pages. I wrote down every detail of this. And when I thought, okay, when you were in that blackness and you were floating, what did you say to yourself? And I wrote it out, and it was, I like floating. Floating is fun. This is great. And I was like, oh my God. That's how I know I didn't intend to come back. I would have written something more expressive. I would have been more expansive language.
No,
I like
definitely,
floating.
definitely.
Floating is fun. This is
Yeah.
great.
So out of everything you went through, you put floating is fun. Is this like a Dr. Seuss book?
I know.
Floating is
That's how I
fun.
know I didn't intend to come back.
It must have been
So
a
then,
blast.
oh, it was great. And it was just so fantastic. And my predominant thought was that I'd been given early release for good behavior. And people laugh at that, but I mean it.
Yeah.
I was out. I was done. And the other thought I had, and this is very interesting too, is that I had not done this to myself, that I had been so tempted by suicide for those 29 months, and I got away clean, and my children would not have the stigma of saying, well, our mother offed herself. Everyone knew I was at risk of suicide, but this was a medical mistake. And what I find so compelling is, even in death, I thought about my husband's suicide and its effects. And I thought about what my suicide could have done, but I didn't do that. And I think that's so interesting that his story even made it into my death experience. I mean, that's how deep it was. So as I'm floating away, I thought about Paul's Bible verse, the peace that passeth all understanding. And I thought, that's this peace. That's what Paul was writing about, is perfect peace. And you can't explain it to anybody because they can't understand it until they experience it. And then
Yeah.
I thought, I remember all these Bible verses. Again, everything I am has gone with me. And my curiosity, I mean, I was looking all around. I was trying to take everything in. I was trying to understand it all. I was thinking about, I was thinking about everything all at once. It was just so much to take in. And then this, to me, I know one day I'll have an answer, but I went from floating in that blackness to standing on my feet in a white room with no memory of the transition. And I really know, it's like somebody took my batteries out. I don't know what happened from floating to standing on my feet in a white room. What I really believe is that something happened in that interim. Maybe I saw my loved ones. Maybe the angels talked to me. Maybe I was told stuff that I don't need to remember. I don't know.
Yeah.
But the next thing I knew, I was standing in this white room, and I was on my own. I was standing. I was upright, and I was on something firm under my feet. And the white room was so beautiful. I'm an architectural historian, and I observed there were not light fixtures. The walls, the ceiling, the floor were illuminated from within. And yet there was this very heavy mist, not a fog, but like a vapor all
Yeah.
around me. And it was swirling and dancing and moving. And I tried, you asked earlier about vision, I tried to focus on an individual droplet of this mist, which I know sounds crazy. And the spiritual being, and it's a different one from the one who said, "You're the image and likeness on the original." This is now like I'd call an angel with me. I asked, why can't I focus on an individual droplet? Because I was trying really hard to see it. And the angel said, "Your eyes have not acclimated to this new experience yet. But
Mm.
what you're seeing, these are particles of light, and every droplet is a particle of light and energy." And I thought, well, that makes sense. That's why I wanted to see each individual one. But they were literally just doing this dance around me. And I saw at the far end of this room, and I don't know, 15 feet, 10 feet, 100 feet, I don't know. But at the end of the room, I saw a door. And having read all these NDE accounts, I knew what that door meant. I knew that door meant we're done. And I remember saying to myself, I don't know if I have feet or legs, but I know that if I move with intention, I'll get to that door. And so I manifested an intention to get to that door on the far side of this white room, this beautiful, glorious white room. And it's interesting that while this fine mist was falling all around me, I could see that door. It was like a very thick mist, but I could easily make out the door. So I got to the door, and the door was shut, which I thought, yeah, that door ought to be open. It really should.
Yeah.
But I didn't think too much about that. And then as I got to the door, I put my right hand up to push through the door. And I remember thinking, that's pretty interesting. Right-handed on earth, right-handed in heaven. That's pretty cool. Still, again, a lot of human
Everything
physique.
followed you.
Yes. So as I put my right hand up, I paused. This is where it went off the rails. And I said, "Is this the divine will for my life?" And I meant to say, I mean, that's what I meant to say. All I got out is, "This the divine?"
Mhm.
And the answer was immediate. Because the thing is, I've spent my life reading the Bible. I had been praying for my husband 3 times a day. It
Yeah.
was just a habit that I loved him so much. I used to say, "I can't live without you. I need to go first. I can't live without you." And whenever he went off to work, I'd give him an extra big hug, and I'd ask the angels to watch over him and to stay by his side and to keep his heart healthy, to keep his body and soul clean. I would actually envision a beam of perfect light flowing from the heavens above through his body and removing any impurities or any imperfections. And I did that every day. And at noon, I would say a quick prayer, and at nighttime, I would say a prayer for him. So I had been very invested in believing in God. And that was probably the biggest casualty of what he did. Was I lost my faith. I lost that belief in God. So at this door, in this white room, I just wanted to do the will of God. I really did. And when you're in that place, all you want to do is the will of God. There's no thought of self. You just want to do what God wants done. So I did ask, "Is this the divine will for my life?" And the angel said, "No. But whatever you decide, you go with all of God's love and mercy and blessings and grace and care. There isn't a wrong decision." And that meant so much to me, because one of my prayers had been, I can't handle any more decisions. I talk about decision fatigue. And, this is a pretty big decision.
Oh,
So I
indeed.
thought, hey, that's a deal. I'll take the door. You don't need to ask me twice. And then, this is where it really went off the rails. I had a vision of that RN. And by vision, I do not believe this was a concurrent vision. I think this was a potential future vision. That nurse who had shown me such tender care and held my hand and said, "Oh, honey, we're not going to let you die." I had a vision of her in that little ER, but this time she was in a back room, in a supply room, surrounded by linens and bandages and, hospital supplies. She was sitting on a little metal stool in the middle of the room, head in her hands, leaning forward, sobbing uncontrollably, and she said, "I promised that woman I wasn't going to let her die, and I lost her." And I thought, "Oh, come on, don't do this to me. Don't do
Yeah.
this to me. I need to go. I need to be on my way. Please don't ask me to go back."
Yeah, please don't bring me back or anything.
Yeah. And because here's the thing, the other thing I remembered, I was supposed to start chemotherapy the next Monday. Well, actually, I was starting a tutorial on chemo
Oh,
and wound care,
and you didn't
whatever.
want that.
Right. And I was supposed to have daily radiation and once a week chemo for starting like in days. I don't even remember the sequence, but it was pretty quick. And I remember thinking, hey, I don't want to go back to that either. And
well, if you're in that pure bliss, who would want to go back to that? Now, I know on Earth, you know, the individuals, they care. That's why they say that. But until they experience what you were going through, it's like, who in their right mind would want that?
Yeah, especially knowing what you're facing.
Yeah.
Because I was terrified of that whole prospect. So then I didn't just see this, because I remember thinking, well, you know, she's a nurse, she's an RN, she signed up for this. I'm not going to be the first person she saw die.
Yeah.
I mean, I really was like, I got to go. My need to go outweighs this temporary grief she may be experiencing. She doesn't know me.
She don't know anything about me.
That's right. But then I felt her grief, and I recognized it as that agonal grief that I had known from my husband, for just that unassailable, horrible pain that nothing can ameliorate.
Well, if I could say, Rosemary, you understand, or not understood, you could feel the love.
That's a good point.
In the
I
caring, correct?
Way.
Like, wow, this person really cares. I mean, they're loving.
Yeah. That's a very good point. She did genuinely care. She wasn't just, oh, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
She said, what she said, I remember so clearly. She said, oh, honey, we're not going to let you die. And I mean, I remember thinking, if I had been her own dear child, she could not have shown me any more love and care. I mean, she looked in my eyes when she said it. So then when I felt her grief, I mean, this is almost funny, but if you could express it this way, it was like that grief hit me right in the solar plexus. It hit me right at the center of my being. And I put my right hand down. It had been up to push through that door. And I said, this is going to ruin that nurse's day if I die. And in a millisecond of a millisecond, I was back in that back in the body, back on that gurney. Lots of stuff happening now.
You're like, what?
My buddy Milton,
what did I come back to?
My buddy Milton said they even called the receptionist back there to work on me. So they had lots of activity going on. Meanwhile, and I know we're getting close to time, but I want to share the Milton story.
No, it's fine. I had a couple questions once you're done.
Okay, the Milton story is my favorite because Milton had been an avowed atheist. Milton had been a neighbor, and then, he stepped into the fray because he wanted me to live. Everyone wanted me to live, but nobody knew what to do. Milton was the one strong enough to manage I would do this thing my daughters called the pterodactyl scream, where I'd just be sitting on a couch staring into space and just start screaming at the top of my lungs. It was just too much pain in me, and maybe screaming let some of it out. Boy, you want to clear out a room. Put a 56-year-old woman in there and let her scream at the top of her lungs a few times.
Yeah.
And I'm a very self-controlled person. I am incredibly mentally disciplined, and I'm not even sure where those screams came from. So anyway, Milton had always been an avowed atheist and very proud of being an atheist, very happy to be an atheist. And he actually subscribed to a magazine called American Atheist. And every month it came to our shared home, and he would show it to me, and he'd say, you're a person with a good intellect. This is very intelligently written. I bet you'd enjoy a few of the articles in here. And I'd always say, I have no interest in that. You keep it to yourself. So when the doctors had come rushing into this ER after, my blood pressure went to nothing, and, he saw me open my eyes, reach heaven, and all that, the doctor and the nurse entered the room rather hurriedly, and they shoo him out into the hallway so they can work on me. And, he said they went running by with a crash cart about 3 minutes later, with the paddles right on the top of it and everything.
Yeah.
So he said in the hallway, he said, I thought, what do I do now? This woman spent my life for 2 years. I kept her alive for 2 years, and she just died. What do I do with her dog? What do I do with the house? What do I do with my life now? And he was thinking those thoughts, and he said it was like, an angel came to him, and he said it was like somebody wrapped a heavy blanket of warmth, comfort, and peace around his shoulders. And the message was, it's okay. We just need her for a few minutes. She'll be back. And he was so comforted and so assured of this message that he walked out into the lobby and got himself a soda.
So your dear friend, so let me get this right for myself and the audience. Your dear friend, who is an atheist, he had an angelic visit while you were in the dead state. And that immediately
Right.
transformed him into a devout believer.
It did. In
That is
fact,
absolutely.
I tell people he was in the blast zone.
Amen. Well, you know what? Things like that, it's amazing how someone, all their life who could be an atheist is transformed. Now, people who push back on that, you know what? That just does not happen out of the blue. There has to be an event just like that for that to change. Because I know atheists too, and you know what? They're very humble, great individuals. They're loving people. But when something and they always tell me it's going to have to take a miracle for me to change. Well, guess what? Your friend, that was a miracle. Amen to that.
Oh, it was. And, the PS to this, I mean, this has been more than 2.5 years now.
Yeah.
Ever since then, he sends me Bible verses. He reads the Bible to me. He reads me his favorite articles he's found on, how a Bible verse impacted somebody's life. He has been an amazing source of inspiration. And every now and then because I still, I still struggle with some PTSD.
Of course.
It's world's better. I can function in the world again. But when I get really down, he'll say, what about what the angels told you? How can you discount that? So he has been a cheerleader for the divine.
Right on.
Since this happened.
Well, see, I think God let that happen because you needed, even though I'm sure you have a support structure, you needed somebody close, especially a very close friend. And the fact that he let your friend have just a vision like that, a visitation, just, to me, that says, hey, Rosemary, here's someone who can provide a lot of support in your life. And that sounds like what he's doing for you. He's providing that extra support that you need when you're down.
He's been wonderful. And then he didn't tell me about this until and after all this, I get transported to the hospital. Finally, we get lights and siren. Finally, we're passing everybody on the road. I really believe once they got me back, and one of the things I learned, I was dead, no heartbeat, no blood pressure for more than 10 minutes. And when you die of bleeding out, they can't even do CPR because all they'll do is push more blood out of you.
Yeah.
So the point of this story is the belief is after 3 minutes without oxygenation to the brain, your brain is mush.
Mm-hmm.
But I was more than 10 minutes. And I mean, I swear I came back with my intellect supercharged, but that defies all medical belief systems that somebody who doesn't have CPR, that has literally bled to death, because it's fascinating. The body tries to preserve the core. When you're losing blood, it shuts off the extremities and the arms, and it just tries to keep blood in the chest, the heart, and the brain.
Yeah.
So when you bleed to death, you're down pretty low. So, but when I was out of the hospital, I was in the hospital for 4 days, and then I went home. And so I was flopped on my couch at my house, and Milton is sitting to my left in a chair in front of me, and his sister's Mabel sitting in the other chair in front of me. And Milton tells us this story. He said, well, I think I had an experience of my own. And I said, oh, really? Do tell. And that's when he told us the story of the angel coming to him and saying, it's okay, we just need her for a few minutes, she'll be right back. And I said, so Milton, what did this do to your belief system? And he said, well, if there's angels, there must be a God. Yep. And he said, I think you've just proven there's eternal life, that life goes on. And he said, so it's pretty much shattered everything I've ever believed. And he said, there is a God, and I was wrong. And his sister, Mabel, became very emotional. And she said, brother, I've been praying for you for 40 years that you would learn about the love of God and accept God into your life. So I remember being on that couch, still miffed that I got, evicted from heaven, still a little miffed about that whole show. But I thought, what if the reason I came back was so Milton would know this? I thought that's an okay reason. I think I can live with that.
Well, you know what, Rosemary? God, here's how I picture this, and I know it's true, and I think you do too. God uses people for certain ways. Like, for example, your friend, okay, Milton. He may have been a hard individual to get through to about believing in God and all this. And sometimes it takes big events for individuals to immediately change. And I think God used you in a positive way to let your friend see, and getting his angelic visit of like, wow, this is real. But not just with your friend. The message you share, I believe, is very important, especially what our listeners hear and in general, the people you reach, because God can do anything he wants. And I do believe there are people in this world who are just not weak, but it's hard to get through to them. And I believe he did use you for his purpose, like he does all of us. Not everybody's going to have an experience like you, of course, but he uses those to help and show other people, I am real. I'm here. And that's how I look at it. It's a sad thing at the beginning, but the end result, if it's God's will, becomes a positive thing. And from what you said, it's all now became a positive conclusion.
It did. And, one of the things the angels told me, and I'm not sure if this happened while I was in heaven or if it happened right after I came back, because I've heard people say after they come back from these experiences, they feel like they're 50% in that world and 50% in this one. I don't agree. I felt like I was 95% in that world and 5% in this one. And in fact, even when I was being transported by ambulance, they had put an oxygen mask over my face. My buddy Milton, he's a former Vietnam era Army medic. He said when they wheeled me out to the ambulance, he said, you were literally white as a sheet. You hear people say that, but you can't imagine a human being that white. And he said, and your lips were dark blue and under your eyes were bluish. And he said, I literally have seen corpses that looked a lot better than you looked. So I was in pretty bad shape. Wow. But on the ambulance ride, the angels filled that ambulance. It's like there weren't even walls in the ambulance. It was just this cluster, a cloud of angels riding with me. And I had this, full oxygen mask on. And the angels were telling me these incredibly funny stories. And I kept taking the mask off to laugh because I said to him, that you're cracking me up here. And then the ambulance attendant would snap it back on my face and say, don't do that again. But I really believe the ambulance driver thought I think everyone never expected that I would make it to the hospital.
Yeah.
And once I got into the hospital and I got checked in, I remember that night I felt internally like everything was wrong, like things were just off. And I asked the angels, am I going to die again? Because I can tell something's very wrong in the core of my body. Something's off. And they said, it was so clear. They said, we're doing some adjustments. You're not going to die again. You have 20 years. And I was like, 20 years? That's a long time.
Yeah.
But the angels told me so much about everything. But one of the things that I was told very clearly, as you said in the intro, is if I agreed to come back, I'd be healed of everything. The emotional, the physical. I told people I was a broken soul. That my soul was shattered into too many pieces to ever be put back together again. And I was a pretty hot mess. And I don't know, the time in the hospital, I had the angels right with me. And sometimes they sang me songs, and I would just sob when the angels sang me songs. I would just sob like crazy. Because it was like putting 1,000,000 amps through 100,000 amps. It was just too much. And then, but they said I'd be restored to wholeness. And it took some time for the medical stuff to sort itself out. When I had a follow-up appointment with the oncologist, and he didn't want to hear that I'd been healed in heaven. He put that down under the broad umbrella of mental illness.
Yeah.
And so I had to seek out another oncologist who wanted to do another surgery. And she was pretty scared about the whole thing because now I've refused chemo and radiation. I didn't show up for my appointments. I told him I wasn't going to show. And the second oncologist was terrified because she said, I'm taking a huge risk here. But second surgery was done, multiple biopsies of multiple flesh everywhere.
Yeah.
And she according to Milton's waiting for me at the second hospital now. This was 2 months later. Milton said she literally came bursting out of the doors into the waiting room where he was and said, she's right. There's not one cell of cancer to be found. She's healed. So that was pretty dramatic. That was extremely dramatic.
Wow.
And then the PS to this is they sent me home on day 4. Oh, one of the interesting things. So the next morning, I'm at the hospital. I was there a total of 4 days. But the next morning after I've died and I come back, they bring in the real doctor. I no longer get the 27-year-old. I get the 58-year-old doctor.
You're getting the intern, Rosemary.
Yeah. Now I get the real doctor once they figure out they killed me,
Amen.
And he says, I said, hey, he came in, he said, you've had a heart attack. I said, no, 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 wrong chart. I ride my bike. I walk several miles every day. Wrong chart. Look again, Rosemary.
Yeah.
He said, no, 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 right chart. You've had a heart attack. I said, I don't understand. That can't be. And he said, well, you lost so much blood, your heart stopped. And he said, apparently your heart throws off enzymes right
Yeah.
before it all goes bad. And he said, your enzymes are way up. You've definitely had a major cardiac event. But he said, they've already started coming back down this morning. So we know it's not underlying heart disease. It was a heart attack.
Okay.
And I said, I don't understand. And he said, well, you lost so much blood, your heart stopped. And I said, well, how much blood did I lose? And he said, well, more than 40%. I said,
Ooh.
well, yeah. I said, well, how much more? He said, well, you know what? It doesn't matter because at 40%, your heart stopped.
Oh
Or,
my
typically.
goodness.
So they were able to affirm that I had lost so much blood, my heart did stop. And
That's
then they
crazy.
they wheeled me off for a bunch of tests. And the whole time they're wheeling me down the corridor because I'm on 100% bed rest now. And, one thing I loved about this, I had very little experience with the medical world. One thing I loved about this is they made it very clear, you're not going to die on our watch. Yeah, things went wrong before, but you're not going to die on our watch. And I felt so loved and so cared for. I had been so ostracized by society. I was a leper after what my husband did. Suicide widows and widowers are 12 to 48 times more likely to end their own life. If we want to have a serious conversation about suicide prevention, we need to talk about those of us who've lost a child or a spouse to suicide, because we are 12 to 48 times more likely to end our own life. In my Facebook group, this Facebook group for suicide widows, we've already lost 3 women who killed themselves because of what their husband did. It's you get ostracized. Society says, "Oh my God, that's so scary. I don't want that to happen to me." So yes, we get shoved off in a corner and marginalized in every way imaginable. So it's to be in a hospital where they were like, "We're not going to let you. We're not going to let you go. You're going to be okay. You're going to get through this. It's all going to be all right." Every time I thought, even now thinking about it, reduces me to tears, because I was like, they wanted me to stay alive. I hadn't heard that from anybody for a while.
Yeah.
They cared. So they were very kind in their care of me and very solicitous. And um, one of the things I was on total bed rest, so they're wheeling me off for these heart tests, echocardiogram, and I guess some other things, and they're wheeling me down the hallway. And I said, "We don't need to do the test. The angel said if I agreed to come back, I'd be fine, fine, fine." And they said, "We're going to do the test anyway."
Well, you know what, Rosemary? You had faith.
Well, I believe the angels.
Yeah. Of course you
So they're wheeling me.
did.
So after all these, and they did a lot of blood work, because the belief is when somebody bleeds to death, you can have catastrophic damage to like your extremities,
Yeah.
and you can also have catastrophic damage to internal organs. We're not meant to run out of blood. And what was the other one? Oh, kidneys, heart, and liver can be really damaged by all this. So test after test after test comes back. This wonderful doctor, again, the older doctor, comes in every morning, sits down with me, goes, "Rosemary, you're a very lucky woman." He says, "Everything is fine. There is no heart damage. Your heart is perfectly healthy. Your liver functions good. Your kidney functions just where it should be. Everything is just as it should be." And so I told you, yeah, whatever. The angel said I'd be fine. And I was. And that's one of the little PSs to this, is when I first went back to the hospital, I think it's my hemoglobin, the red blood cell count was like at 6.4, which is, after rapid blood loss, is barely enough to sustain life. Well, I died. So when the doctor said your hemoglobin is like 6.4, I said, "Really? The angel said I'd be fine." And I asked the angels about it. I said, "What's up with this?" Because normal is 13.2.
Yep.
And the angel said, "We know you, Rosemary. You're the doubting Thomas. We needed you to see, yeah, you really died. Yeah, your heart stopped. Yeah, your hemoglobin went so low, it wasn't even enough to sustain life." They said, "But we're not done." And I had another blood test done at day 12, and my numbers were textbook perfect. And there was an expectation to take 2 to 3 months for those numbers to return to normal, because that's how long it's believed it takes the bone marrow to regenerate. So yeah, at 12 days out, my numbers were perfect. In fact, the doctor looked at the numbers from 12 days out, and he put the paper, actually she at this point, put the paper down and said, "I see your blood numbers are wrong." I said, "Why?" And they said, "Well, it's perfect. 12 days out, it can't be perfect." I said, "No, I'm back out to walk. I'm back to riding my bike, gently, slowly, but I'm back to riding my bike, and that breathlessness is gone." And she put her paper down, and she goes, "That's impossible." So it was really miracle after miracle. And after this, I did literally, I realized the happiest I'd ever been in my consciousness was at that time floating away in the blackness. And I sold everything I owned. I sold all my worldly possessions, all my furniture. I had a lot of research materials. I donated it all to local college library. Once I was done selling everything, I sold my shiny new car that I had kind of waited a lifetime to buy.
Wow.
And I had special ordered that car. That was a nice car. And then I sold my house, sold in 2 hours. And then I got in my car and loaded my car up with my clothes and the things I'd kept. And I had a slightly used Prius C that I had bought, and I drove 1,000 miles due west to start a new life in the Midwest.
Wow. So that's how, you know what? This really did change you, because I think this shows you, you know what? Everything here on earth, it's everything that's to come is what you actually want. And it shows you things here on earth, like possessions, really had no significant value then in your eyes after this experience.
None.
Wow.
Absolutely no value at all. And one thing I guess I should have mentioned, when I was floating away in that blackness, I said to the angels that were with me, I said, I've been here before, like in this experience, in this consciousness, I've been in this place before. And the angels said, yeah, remember that story we told, remember that story your mom used to tell you? Which my mom didn't tell me this till I was in my 30s. I had been given up for dead as an infant, and my mother continued to pray, and I revived, and nobody could believe it. But yeah, I came back from the dead as an infant, and the angel said, yeah, it wasn't a close call, it turns out. You had been here then, and we sent you back, which helped me understand. And I remember telling the angels, you know what, that would have been real good to know these last 58 years when I was classified as a weirdo and an oddball. But okay, explains a lot. But that explained why I had been so hungry to read about these NDEs.
Yeah.
I'd always known I'd been different.
That's just amazing. So if I can ask you just to wrap it up here, what have you, or what's your takeaway from this regarding the whole near-death experience? Of course, we know that, well, just from this interview alone, it's changed you profoundly. I can't talk.
Profoundly or profusely.
Yeah. So it completely changed you for the better. And
changed Milton, changed a lot of people who's heard the story. It changed a lot.
And see, I think that's amazing, because you know, those aren't the first times I've heard individuals just changing like that. Especially Milton. I actually know somebody that had an angelic visit as well. And you know what? They're the most reliable person ever. And they have no gain of making something like that up, because like a gentleman I was talking to the other day, he grew this whole career that he had, PhD, the university, professor, all this stuff. And he threw away his career and became a minister because of his near-death experience, and that was Howard Storm. And he was telling me, you know what, who in their right mind would throw away something for just to make something? It doesn't happen like that. So you people go through these things.
Yes, I actually had a neuroscientist contact me after seeing one of my YouTube videos. She wanted to meet me. She was driving, well, she drove a little bit out of her way, but she was in the area. We met for dinner and we talked for 4 hours, and she said, the reason I want to meet you is because the human brain does not rewire itself to the extent that you did, period. She said, and of everything in your story, that's the most believable part to me, that you went through a spiritually transformative experience, is because you changed everything about your life.
Yeah.
Human beings don't do that.
Oh, that's true. That's completely true.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that's a fantastic, wow. You're awesome to talk to. That's completely awesome.
You.
So I just want to verify. So you said you're working on a website. So is that website going to be temporarydeath.com?
That is the website. It's not quite finished, but it's coming.
Okay.
And then in the meantime, my other website, my old website for the architecture stuff, is searshomes.org. And that's there's a lot of near-death stuff on that website. But as I make this transition, that will be where people can reach me for a time. But it's searshomes.org, O-R-G.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, you can check out all the information in the description. We will have the links to her upcoming website, and then to
and I wrote a book.
SearsHomes.com. Yes, and she wrote a book. And I just want to verify, correct me if I'm wrong, the books here are Remembering the Light, How Dying Saved My Life. Is that correct?
Correct. That's the title. And it's within days of being finished. So it's not quite done. I mean, it's done,
Yeah.
but it's off getting formatted and such.
Well, what I will do, Rosemary, I'll stay in contact with you, or you can reach out to me whenever that book's done. I'll put everything in the description to give our audience ways to go, or I'm pretty sure you're going to have all this on your website. And but yeah, I'll post that all below. But
Okay.
I really appreciate speaking with you. Is there anything else you would like to say before we start wrapping things up to our audience?
Oh, I could talk for 6 days. I don't
So
think
could
you
I.
want that, but I think I think those are the broad strokes.
Okay. Well, Rosemary, it's been an absolute honor speaking with you. And
Thank you.
I really appreciate your time. If you could just hold on the line for a moment, and I'll be right back with you.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Rosemary Thornton. What a fantastic guest to talk to. Her story is phenomenal. And check out the description below for her website, her YouTube page, her books, and her bio. Because this story is absolutely phenomenal. And going back to her story, I just wanted to share this as well about her husband's suicide. I just want to share this. The National Suicide Prevention Line for anybody in need is 1-800-273-8255. So if you or anybody you know needs help, reach out to them. But that was Rosemary Thornton, and until next time, I am Elijah for Mysterious Realms. Peace.